Professors of Reddit, have you ever looked yourself up on RateMyProfessor? What did you find? All the time. 4.9 overall and 3.0 difficulty, right where I want to be. 2 years ago I lost my chili pepper though, which signifies a hot teacher. It legitimately inspired me to start working out again. I was rated as a /top. As a pudgy middle-aged balding man I was quite pleasantly surprised with chilies. My dad is a professor so I searched him up and no one bothered rating him : left parenthesis. I had a math professor last semester that during the first lecture of every class pulls up his RMP, which was a 1.4, and his university internal student surveys and read some of the more insulting ones. He would then talk about how he doesn't. A Spanish professor I had once remarked to my class that if we looked him up, he had the little chili icon, which means he was rated hot. Then he started jokingly blowing kisses and thanking everyone. My uncle was an associate chemistry professor at a large state university. Curious about his ratings I searched him up on the site. He had terrible, almost comedic reviews. Things along the lines of /his. Not me, but my husband. One of his students said, /I. Bit of a mix. Some said some really lovely things, but the one I'm still salty about said that I talk too fast and that they couldn't get the notes down. Tell me these things while I'm teaching. I want my students to learn, but I can't know if you're lost if you don't tell me. It's something I now carefully reiterate at the start of each semester. 2 different students, several years apart, left me a 2-word review. When. You guys know some professors write their own ratings, right? /S. Well, I had a 4.0 until the student that I caught plagiarizing left a 1-star review calling me the most arrogant professor she ever had. Girl, maybe don't copy whole paragraphs that are written in British Standard English and try to turn them in as your own work when you're going to an American community college. Not my fault you cheated. I once received an envelope with 11 letters from music performance majors, piano and organ. Essentially, the students highlighted teaching techniques that they believed brought out the best in their musical abilities and propelled them to continue on in their chosen career as performers. They even included pics of themselves for me to /remember. Not on RateMyProfessor, but the first semester I taught at the university level, one of the comments on my evaluations was I looked up my sister, she wears a lot of black. One of the ratings said One of my co-workers is a former college professor. On one of her reviews, someone wrote /she. Man, I just realized they took away the page 6s : left parenthesis. I had a professor that was incredibly smart, working on his 4th PhD, and everyone loved him. One day thought he was talking about a problem and turned to write on the whiteboard and I guess forgot exactly where he was because he was one of those walk and talk types, turned around and walked straight into a wall. Someone put it on that site along with saying he was the best professor ever. A week later he came in cracking up and said /which. I once dated a guy who was a professor and had never looked himself up, so I did so on our first date. Turns out he was very well liked. There was a second date. I had ratings as a lab child then when I was teaching for like a year at a community college and most of the ratings were supportive. /he_s. Not a prof but I had one who took pride in his shisty ratings. He pulled up his RMP page first day of class and joyously pointed out all the negative reviews to try and make a point about how tough and unforgiving he was. Dude got off on failing students, S2G. I have one bad review that I'm about 99% positive was written by an angry racist I had that semester who was furious with me when I shut down a racist tirade he was on. If it wasn't him who wrote that review then I don't know what I did to piss that student off. If you're curious, he tried to claim that African and Muslim immigrants are /destroying /Europe and when I wouldn't accept his view he pulled out what he clearly thought was an automatic argument winner, which is that he had a friend from Switzerland who told him it was true and apparently I wasn't allowed to argue with that because he was from Europe. I argued with it anyway and a bad RateMyProf review was born. I looked up my boyfriend's dad once. His students were not kind. I thought it was funny. I do like him, he is very nice to me, I just could understand the students saying he was a hard teacher. I looked at mine, got comments like I'm not a professor, but my grandmother is an online professor, and while my sister and I were looking through the website while picking classes, we thought it would be fun to look at her reviews. She had only a few and they were majority positive. A lot of them talked about how kind and accommodating she was, which was surprising to me and my sister because with family our grandmother is generally strict and very much a he. My dad is a math professor and he rates himself and gives himself chili peppers. So, take the ratings with a grain of salt. Validation. Not a prof, and neither was the teacher lol. Years 8, 12-13 years old, someone wrote on my teacher's page that she was a dementor. Like from Harry Potter. She tore the entire class a new one and yet no one would confess to it. Favorite memory from that class. /Latin. While I was in college my father taught a class at it too, although in a different field than mine. One day I decided to check and much to my surprise I discovered that he had been rated. It was a fairly good rating, but what stuck with me was the comment, /the I used to get nice, and sometimes creepy comments on my appearance. 10 years later those types of comments have dried up but my colleagues and administrators never miss a chance to tease me about them. Overall a 4.5 or something but not too bad. I pay much more attention to my official university student evals. Not a professor, but frick, don't take anything for the study abroad programs offered by Miskatonic, especially if it's being held by the geology, archaeology, or literature departments. Seriously. Don't. /the Hoping my biology professor has read his and realizes how impossible his exams are. Not a professor but I just looked up my one, mostly teaches child development and she had the following 2 reviews. 1. At first when I saw her all I could think about was how she looked like the penguin guy from Batman. I looked up a picture and it is actually a pretty close as resemblance lol. 2. Her fashion is more interesting than the clash. No idea where she gets her fashion advice. I would be embarrassed to go out in public with her if I was one of her children, whom she always talks about. My master's advisor, who I also paid for, checks the site. He is about 66 years old and a full professor at a big state university in the western US. There was a botch up that happened in that semester and he sent me to improve the situation, citing unnamed sources. They were all pretty good reviews, which was nice. The theme was that I was a really easy teacher, apparently. I did have a chili pepper, which, whatever. And one of the reviews mentioned that they found my cat videos and stand-up online. I have, mostly positive, confirming things I already suspected or had gotten other feedback on already. A few early ones from students I ticked off are a bit harsh. I remember one dude sitting in class, obviously writing the bad review in his head. The look he gave me. But I think I've done better over time. I really like one of them that said I was a good guy who loves his wife and corgi. That's about all I could ask for in my characterization. In general, students aren't really in a position to evaluate good teaching. I appreciate their perspective and collect a ton of survey data, but it's taken alongside a lot of other measures too. Plus, there are studies about how many biased there are in student evals. I am always sure to host office hours with my corgi around when evals occur, to artificially boost my ratings. Not sure if that translates to RMP though. My sister is a professor. I am pretty sure her rating is /smart. Not quite the same, but when I was a TAS student left an anonymous comment that I was incredibly helpful and dedicated and that they wished they were brave enough to ask me out after the course was over. That comment carried me for the entire next semester of teaching. That students who leave reviews tend to either be very pleased with my teaching or very not. The main complaint I get is that I require too much reading, mandatory attendance in first year writing, and grade too harsh. My favorite review, by far, is a reply to these complaints from another student with /it. I had a student give me a great review on Yelp once, so that was kinda cool. I have dated 2 professors at different times and in 2 very different fields. Your question made me check up on both of them. Sadly, not me personally, but my uncle is a professor and I made the mistake of looking his profile up once. Every last review tore him to shreds and it broke my heart. My uncle is a relatively boring / inexpressive person, so I was not expecting good reviews, but it killed me to read how nasty some of the reviews were. A few months after that experience, I was tempted to write a nasty review of my own calculus professor. He was awful, but decided against it. Instead, I wrote a letter to the department of my chemistry professor. He was incredible about how excellent he was and how much I appreciated having him as a teacher. Focus on the good. I did my first semester teaching when I first learned about it. There were a couple pretty negative reviews and it was a hit to my ego. I decided I wouldn't look again, as looking at most of the reviews on the site it seemed mainly a place for dissatisfied students to let off steam, and as I was just starting out I didn't need school feedback adding stress. I taught for 10 years and always tried to incorporate opportunities for unbiased feedback during the semester. My school had standardized evaluations we were required to administer to the class, and I always scored high on those, and usually would have students thank me at the end of class, many saying they had learned a lot or enjoyed my teaching style. I taught a difficult subject that was required for the program, so there's always going to be some students that were unhappy at the end of class, and you can't teach to everyone's style, so why let those negatives be amplified in your head? Disappointed to say after 6 years of adjuncting and saying I don't have a single rating. My university ones were good. My dad was a prof and his were low. I found them funny because I give him low ratings as a dad. I get rated by the internal school ratings and I typically get top marks for my innovation and entrepreneurship classes for graduate students and executives. Some of the programs did. Not me, but the students of my ex-wife seem to completely agree with me that either A, she is neglectful, or B, she is charming. Many years ago, some students tipped me off that I was on RateMyProfessor. /I. Not me, but looked up my wife. There were 2 reviews, a negative one from a girl who was an entitled little brat, plagiarized multiple papers, and failed the class even after my wife gave her every opportunity to make them up, and another one saying she was the hottest teacher in the university, and being woeful about the ring on her finger. Not exactly the same, but I work with little kids, 4 to 9 years old, and we have these little boxes where they can write messages or ask questions to the staff, anonymously or otherwise. If they're P. My friend is a professor and he would always jokingly brag about having a 5 on RateMyProfessor until a student gave him a 1 because /P. Looked up one of my professors before my first class. One of the reviews was /B. Positive reviews get posted whenever, but without fail, negative reviews are always posted after students receive their grade. I first noticed it when my niece told me she saw my RateMyProfessor page and I decided to check it out. The only negative review at the time was posted that week, the day the students had their essay marks posted. Each semester in December and April a negative review pops up at the time final or essay grades are released. Generally speaking, feedback from students is never super helpful because it rarely pinpoints how the students want me to change. It is usually generic praise or a complaint about marks. I tanked my rating by preventing students from freeloading. My physiology professor did. He had middling scores at best, but he didn't give a shiz because he was confident in his own teaching ability and said it was just students who didn't do well and blamed him for it. That was pretty much true. He was a great lecturer and instructor, but he could rub people the wrong way and it was a hard clash. I liked him, so I taught at the graduate level at a college for 8 years. Not one review. Come on. My course evaluations are really good. I teach computer graphics, so not hard to make class fun and practical. Then my dipshi's department chair asks me to teach an undergrad class, he usually does, and said /T. My brother is a professor at one of the universities in Ottawa and I checked out his and it seems the students have the same opinion as I do of him. Smug, arrogant, likes to talk about his cats, hockey and Star Wars and not very helpful when it comes to course material. 60% disapproval. You poor bastards that have to take his course. They see if you read this, your students are right on the money. / My analog circuits professor liked to look at his profile because he felt bad reviews were a reflection of bad students, so he would laugh and do it for entertainment. He was a really good professor teaching a really challenging course, so I get where he is coming from. Yes, a good half of the reviews were written by me. I hold myself in very high esteem, it seems. I actually use this as a teaching tool on how to be wary of information as it can be created and manipulated in ways that may not always be apparent. It works well because almost every student has read the rating and comments before class. Always question what you read. Never assume it is true, especially if it. I only taught one class, second one coming up this coming semester. Currently only have one rating. 4/5 with difficulty at 3. I'm glad this semester is virtual. I don't want to look these people in the eye again. This particular school is just ... I went to school where I'm an adjunct now, so I know the types of students here. I knew how to actually level with them last semester, but like this is such a unique school, these students will roast me. So I am not looking at RMP after this semester. RateMyProfessor was a thing. I looked up my buddy and this made me laugh. My ex was a dean, but taught a class, then looked herself up. Good rating, but the comment that delighted her was, I thought Introduction to Nursing Chemistry for 1 year. The reviews were very polarized. I would be praised for developing concepts from multiple angles, and ridiculed for only rigidly teaching one way of doing things in the next review. I went on there to genuinely look for constructive criticism, and instead I found reviews completely inconsistent. Years ago at an extended family party, someone asked my professor cousin the same question. Early smartphone days, she looked it up and read in real time /4.2. My dad is a professor and teaches music history, specifically the history of rock and roll. He is a super popular teacher and has great ratings on RMP and even had a hot pepper go dad. There are only like 2 negative reviews from his class, one of which says /if.